I'll see you at Moonlight Bistro tonight, at 9. Corner booth, like always, darling. I heard my husband whisper into his phone, thinking I was still outside watering the garden. When I walked into that restaurant 4 hours later and saw him sitting across from my best friend of 12 years, their fingers intertwined on the white tablecloth, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world, everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled in an instant. But when I finally confronted them both and discovered the truth about what they'd been planning behind my back for months, everything changed forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever experienced betrayal like this, you're not alone. And if this resonates with you, please subscribe, because what happens next is something I never could have imagined. The October rain was pelting against the windows of our Craftsman home in Riverside Heights that Tuesday evening when I first noticed something was seriously wrong. My husband, David Cameron, had been acting strange for what felt like weeks. Hushed phone conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room, mysterious text messages that made him smile in ways I hadn't seen directed at me in months, and this distant, distracted energy whenever we were together. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to uncover about the two people I trusted most in this world. I had just returned from my evening yoga class at Harmony Studio downtown when I decided to surprise David with dinner from Luigi's, the little Italian place on Maple Street where we had our first date. The house felt unusually quiet as I pushed through the front door, my keys jingling against the ceramic bowl we kept on the entry table. Setting the takeout bags on our granite kitchen counter, I called out his name, expecting to hear his usual warm response from his office upstairs. But instead of his voice, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The soft murmur of conversation drifting down by quiet laughter that sounded intimate, secretive, and definitely not work-related. My heart started hammering against my ribs as I stood frozen in our kitchen, straining to make out the words. David's voice was different, softer, more tender than I'd heard him in months. "I can't wait to hold you tonight," he was saying, and I could hear his smile in his voice through our wooden floors. "Wear that red dress I love so much." The red dress? My stomach dropped like a stone. I had never owned a red dress. David had always said red wasn't my color, that I looked better in blues and greens. So who was he talking to about a red dress he loved? I crept toward the staircase, my bare feet silent on our hardwood floors. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, each movement bringing me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to face. "The usual spot," David continued, his voice growing clearer as I climbed higher. "Table 7 in the back corner. Nobody will see us there." Table 7. My legs nearly gave out. Moonlight Bistro's Table 7 was tucked away in the most romantic corner of the restaurant, surrounded by trailing ivy and dim candlelight. It was the same table where David had told me he loved me for the first time 3 years ago on a snowy February evening that felt like a lifetime ago now. "I love you too, baby," he whispered, before I heard the click of him ending the call. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. David, my David, who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who still opened car doors for me, who had promised just last month that we would start trying for a baby this year, was planning a secret rendezvous with another woman. The bathroom door opened, and I heard the shower turned on in our master suite. David's post-work routine, which meant I had maybe 15 minutes before he came downstairs, probably to lie to my face about working late again. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip my car keys as I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I needed to see this for myself. I needed to know who was destroying my marriage, who was stealing my husband's affection, while I remained completely oblivious. The drive to Moonlight Bistro felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. Every familiar street corner seemed to mock me with memories of happier times. The coffee shop where David and I had spent countless Saturday mornings reading the paper together. The park where we'd walked our dog Max every evening. The florist where he used to buy me surprise bouquets just because it was Tuesday. How long had he been lying to me? How many of those late work meetings had actually been romantic dinners with her? How many times had I kissed him goodnight, completely unaware that his heart belonged to someone else? Moonlight Bistro sat on the corner of Oak Street and Fifth Avenue, its warm golden light spilling onto the sidewalk through tall windows framed with white curtains. It had always been our special place, where we celebrated promotions and anniversaries and quiet Tuesday nights when we just wanted to feel connected. Now, it felt like a crime scene. I parked across the street, my heart pounding so hard I was sure other people could hear it. Through the restaurant's front window, I could see couples leaning across small tables, sharing desserts and stolen kisses. The kind of intimate moments I thought David and I still shared, apparently while he was sharing them with someone else too. 9:20 p.m. David was late, which was unusual for him. He was always punctual, especially for important meetings. My stomach churned as I realized this mystery woman was probably very important to him indeed. Then I saw him. David's familiar silhouette appeared in the restaurant's entrance, and he was wearing the navy blue shirt I had bought him for his birthday last month, the one he said made him feel confident and handsome. Watching him wear it for another woman felt like a physical blow to my chest. He walked purposefully toward the back of the restaurant, and that's when my world stopped spinning entirely. Sitting at table 7, already sipping a glass of wine and checking her lipstick in a compact mirror, was someone whose betrayal cut deeper than my husband's ever could. Natalie Pierce, my best friend since college, my maid of honor, the woman who had held my hand through my mother's cancer diagnosis, the woman who helped me choose my wedding dress, the woman who was supposed to be my sister in every way that mattered. She was wearing a stunning red dress I'd never seen before, clearly the one David had mentioned on the phone. Her dark hair was styled in elegant waves, and she was wearing the diamond bracelet I had admired on her just last week, never knowing it was a gift from my husband. I watched in horrified fascination as David approached her table. The smile that lit up Natalie's face when she saw him was radiant, genuine, and filled with the kind of love I thought she reserved for celebrating my happiness. He leaned down and kissed her softly before taking the seat across from her, immediately reaching for her hands across the table. They looked perfect together, natural, like they'd been doing this dance for a very long time. Sitting in my car, watching my entire world collapse through a restaurant window, I realized this wasn't some recent mistake or moment of weakness. This was a relationship, a real, deep, meaningful connection that had been growing right under my nose while I played the role of the oblivious wife. But as I sat there in the darkness, something began to shift inside me. The devastation was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was taking root. Not just heartbreak, but determination. Not just betrayal, but a cold, calculating resolve. They thought I was naive. They thought I was easy to deceive. They thought they could manage me like a problem to be solved rather than a person who deserved respect and honesty. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. That night, everything changed forever. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes, watching my husband and best friend conduct business with my life savings like I was completely irrelevant to my own financial future. Every gesture between them was professional, efficient, practiced. This wasn't their first meeting. This was clearly a well-established partnership that had been operating behind my back for who knows how long. David pulled out what looked like bank statements and spread them across the table between their lunch plates. Natalie leaned forward, pointing at specific numbers with her pen, nodding as David explained something in detail. My stomach churned as I realized this mystery woman was probably very important to him. Indeed.
When the server approached their table, neither of them looked up from the documents. This wasn't a social lunch between friends. This was serious business, and they were treating it with the kind of focus I thought David reserved for his most important clients. Except, apparently, I wasn't important enough to be included in decisions about my own money. I watched Natalie pull out her own folder and slide what appeared to be property photographs across to David. He examined each one carefully, making notes in the margins. Even from across the street, I could see the professional manner in which they were conducting themselves. This wasn't some spontaneous scheme. This was a calculated, long-term business arrangement that had been operating behind my back for who knows how long. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The betrayal was crushing, but what made it worse was how methodical they were being. They had clearly done this before, multiple times, making financial decisions that affected my future while I remained completely unaware. When David reached into his briefcase and pulled out what looked like a checkbook, my heart stopped completely. He was writing a check, right there in front of me. My husband was writing a check for what I can only assume was a substantial amount of money, our money, to finalize some kind of deal I knew nothing about. Natalie examined the check, nodded her approval, and tucked it into her portfolio. Then she reached across the table and shook David's hand with the kind of firm, professional handshake that sealed important business deals.
I felt physically ill. The woman I had trusted with my deepest secrets, who knew about every financial struggle I'd faced, who had celebrated with me when I finally paid off my nursing school loans, was actively participating in hiding money from me. She knew exactly how hard I worked for every dollar that was apparently being invested without my knowledge or consent. As I watched them gather their documents and prepared to leave, something began to shift inside me. The initial shock was giving way to something harder, more focused. Not just hurt, but a burning need to understand the full scope of what they were doing. I needed to get closer. I needed to see those documents, understand what kind of investments they were making, and figure out exactly how much of our savings had been moved without my knowledge. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and walked toward the restaurant. The November air was sharp and cold, matching the chill that had settled into my bones. Through the large windows of Riverside Grill, I could see other business professionals wrapping up their lunch meetings, shaking hands, and making plans that would affect their financial futures. The difference was, those people were making decisions about their own money with their own consent. I positioned myself near the restaurant's side entrance, where I could hear without being immediately noticed. The outdoor seating area was closed for the season, but the decorative planters provided enough cover for me to get close to their corner booth. The Ocean View property should close by the end of the month, David was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Once we get the rental income flowing, we'll be looking at about $3,000 a month profit. $3,000 a month. My breath caught. That was more than I made in overtime pay working extra shifts. They were generating significant income from investments I knew nothing about. What about the Pinecrest development? Natalie asked, shuffling through her papers. The contractor said they could break ground by spring if we commit to the second phase. I've already transferred the funds for that. Pulled it from the emergency account yesterday. She never checks those statements. The emergency account. Our emergency fund that I had been building for years, saving every bonus, every tax refund, every small windfall, thinking we were preparing for unexpected medical bills or job loss. The safety net I thought was protecting our future was apparently being used to fund their secret business ventures. Are you sure she won't notice? Natalie asked, and for the first time, I heard a hint of concern in her voice. You two used to go over the finances together every month. She's not stupid, David. She's been so busy with the extra shifts at the hospital, she hasn't had time to look at the statements. And honestly, she's never been that interested in the investment side anyway. She prefers the budgeting and savings part, the simple stuff. The simple stuff.
My financial contributions, my careful budgeting, my disciplined saving habits were the simple stuff, while they handled the sophisticated investments without bothering to include me. Besides, David continued, by the time she realizes what we've been doing, we'll have generated enough profit to replace everything we borrowed, plus show her a substantial return. She'll be thanking us. Borrowed. They were calling it borrowing when they took money from accounts with my name on them without my permission. They had convinced themselves this was somehow benefiting me, even though I had been completely excluded from every decision. I still feel weird about this, Natalie admitted. She's my best friend. We've been through everything together. If she finds out we've been moving money around without telling her, she won't find out, David said firmly. And even if she did, look at the returns we're generating. The Riverside property has already appreciated 15% since we bought it last month. Her share of the profits will be more than she's made in overtime pay all year. Her share. They were determining what my share would be without my input, as if I was a silent partner in a business I didn't even know existed. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I was sure other people could hear it. The casual way they discussed my financial future, like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be consulted, was almost worse than the deception itself. As I stumbled back to my car, I heard their chairs scraping against the floor as they stood to leave. Through the window, I could see them shaking hands again, David clapping Natalie on the shoulder like they were celebrating a successful business meeting, which I realized with growing horror was exactly what they were doing. Driving home through the familiar streets of Maplewood Creek, I felt like I was seeing everything through a different lens. The bank where we kept our accounts. How many times had David been there without me, moving money I thought was secure? The real estate offices we passed, how many properties had they already purchased with funds I had contributed to but knew nothing about? Our house came into view, the colonial home we rented while saving for our own place. Except, apparently, they weren't saving for our place. They were investing in multiple properties using money I had contributed through countless 12-hour shifts at the hospital.
I sat in our driveway, staring at the front door I had walked through thousands of times, knowing that everything behind it was different now. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a systematic exclusion from my own financial life. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else started to take its place. Not just devastation, but determination. Not just betrayal, but a cold, calculated resolve to understand exactly what they had been doing with my money. They thought I was too busy to notice. They thought I was too trusting to question them. They thought I preferred the simple stuff and would leave the real financial decisions to them. They were about to learn that the woman they had been deceiving was far more capable of understanding complex investments than they had ever imagined, and she was about to become very, very interested in examining every single transaction they had made behind her back. Walking through that front door, I was no longer the same person who had left for work that morning thinking her biggest financial worry was whether we had enough saved for a vacation next summer. That woman had trusted completely. This woman was about to start investigating everything. To understand how devastating that moment truly was, you need to know what my life looked like before it all fell apart. Just 8 months earlier, I thought I was living the perfect partnership in our quiet neighborhood of Maplewood Creek, where tree-lined streets wound past well-maintained homes, and everyone seemed to genuinely care about building something stable and secure together. David and I had moved to Willowbrook 4 years ago, right after we got married. It was one of those charming mid-sized towns where the farmers market on Saturday mornings felt like a community celebration, where local businesses knew their customers by name, and where young couples like us came to build the kind of financial security our parents had dreamed of but never quite achieved. Our rented colonial house on Cedar Avenue was spacious and comfortable, with original hardwood floors, an updated kitchen, and a backyard perfect for the vegetable garden I had started last spring.
We had chosen to rent instead of buy immediately, deciding together that we wanted to save aggressively for at least 2 years to put down a substantial down payment and avoid private mortgage insurance. That decision had been made during one of our monthly financial planning sessions at our kitchen table, with spreadsheets printed out and calculators in hand. David had explained the benefits of waiting, and I had agreed completely. We were a team, making smart decisions about our shared future. I worked as a registered nurse at Riverside Community Hospital downtown, specializing in cardiac care. It was demanding work, 12-hour shifts that left me exhausted but deeply satisfied. I had fought hard to get into the cardiac unit after 2 years in general medical floors, and the pay increase had been substantial. Every extra dollar went directly into our joint savings accounts, funding the future we were building together. My colleagues at the hospital had become like family. Dr. Amanda Torres, the head of cardiology, had become both a mentor and friend, often telling me I had the instincts and dedication to pursue advanced nursing practice if I wanted. The nursing staff worked closely together during those long shifts, and I loved the collaboration and intensity of cardiac care. David worked as a senior accountant at Brennan Financial Services, housed in one of the newer office buildings near the business district. He had this incredible gift for making complex financial concepts accessible to clients, helping small business owners and families plan for retirement, college funds, and major purchases. His clients genuinely trusted him, often calling with questions that went beyond their basic account management. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, financially responsible, supportive of each other's careers, clearly planning for a secure future together. We had systems for everything: budget meetings every first Sunday of the month, automatic transfers to different savings accounts for specific goals, shared spreadsheets tracking our progress toward home ownership. And then there was Natalie. Natalie Pierce had been my study partner at Riverside University's nursing program, where we had spent countless hours in the library preparing for our licensing exams. She was everything I wasn't in some ways, bold where I was methodical, quick to take risks where I preferred careful planning, naturally confident in situations where I second-guessed myself. But somehow we had balanced each other perfectly. She pushed me to be more decisive, and I helped her think through the consequences of her choices. During our final semester, when the pressure of clinical rotations and comprehensive exams felt overwhelming, Natalie was the one to organize study groups and keep us all focused on graduation. After passing our boards, Natalie had moved to Willowbrook, too, taking a position in the emergency department at Riverside Community Hospital. She had this magnetic personality that made her incredibly effective with patients during crisis situations, and her quick thinking had earned her recognition from the emergency medicine physicians. We had maintained our close friendship even as our careers took us to different departments within the same hospital. Tuesday evening dinners at Romano's Pizzeria became our tradition, where we would decompress from difficult shifts and talk about everything from challenging patients to our dreams for the future. Thursday morning coffee before our shifts at Sunrise Cafe was another ritual we rarely missed. Natalie would regale me with stories from the emergency department while I shared updates about the cardiac patients I was following long-term. We understood each other's work stress in ways that people outside healthcare never could.
When David and I had gotten engaged, Natalie was the first person I called after my parents. She had screamed so loudly with excitement that Mrs. Patterson from the apartment next door had knocked to make sure everything was okay. Natalie had insisted on helping with every detail of our small wedding ceremony at Willowbrook Community Church. After the wedding, our trio had found a comfortable rhythm that I treasured. Sunday brunches at Harvest Kitchen became our tradition, where we would sit in the sunny garden room and Natalie would share updates from the emergency department while David and I talked about our latest financial goals and home improvement projects. Natalie had been genuinely supportive of our financial planning. She often commented on how impressed she was with our discipline and organization, saying she wished she had our focus when it came to saving money. When we had explained our strategy for aggressive saving toward a house down payment, she had asked thoughtful questions and even mentioned that she was inspired to start her own savings plan.
David enjoyed Natalie's company immensely. He often said that having her in our lives was like having the sister he had never had, someone who understood my work stress and could make me laugh even after the most difficult shifts at the hospital. When I worked overtime or picked up extra weekend shifts, David and Natalie would sometimes grab dinner together, and I loved coming home to find them debating current events or sharing stories from their respective workdays. The three of us had taken several weekend trips together, always carefully budgeted and planned in advance. We had visited the wine country and Henderson Valley for my birthday, driven to the coast at Marina Bay when David got his promotion, and spent a long weekend in the mountains at Pine Ridge Resort when Natalie received her certification in emergency trauma care. In all of those photos from our adventures, we looked like what we were supposed to be, a financially responsible married couple and their close friend, all working towards stable, secure futures. Our social circle in Willowbrook embraced this dynamic completely. At dinner parties hosted by other couples like Dr. Torres and her husband, or game nights at our neighbors the Hendersons' house on Oak Street, we were always invited as a group. People would automatically include Natalie when they invited us places, as if our trio was the natural order of things. This was the world I thought I knew. A world where financial decisions were made transparently between partners, where your best friends celebrated your financial discipline instead of secretly undermining it, where the people closest to you would never dream of making major decisions about your money without your knowledge or consent. Looking back now, I can see there were signs I missed, moments that should have raised questions about their sudden interest in real estate investing. But when you trust completely, when your relationships feel solid and your financial systems feel secure, you don't go looking for deceptions that seem impossible to imagine. 3 months ago, David had started subscribing to real estate investment newsletters, claiming he wanted to understand market trends better for his clients at Brennan's Financial Services. I had thought it showed professional dedication, and I encouraged his continuing education efforts. Around the same time, Natalie had begun asking more detailed questions about our saving strategies and investment accounts during our coffee dates. She seemed genuinely curious about how we had managed to accumulate such a substantial emergency fund in just a few years. I had been happy to share our methods, thinking I was helping my best friend improve her own financial planning. 2 months ago, David had suggested we increase our automatic savings transfers, claiming that his clients were seeing excellent returns in certain investment vehicles and we should take advantage of market conditions while they were favorable. I had agreed immediately, proud that we could afford to save even more aggressively toward our home ownership goals. Around that same time, Natalie had mentioned that she was considering some investment opportunities that had been recommended by a colleague, asking if I thought it was smart to move money from savings accounts into higher yield investments. I had encouraged her to be careful, but supported her desire to make her money work harder for her future. Last month, David had started working later several evenings per week, claiming he was helping several clients restructure their portfolios, and the paperwork required extensive after-hours research. I had been supportive, even bringing him dinner at his office on nights when he called to say he would be working past 8 o'clock. During that same period, Natalie had seemed distracted during our coffee dates, often checking her phone and mentioning that she was dealing with some complex personal financial decisions. I had offered to help her think through whatever she was considering, but she had said she wanted to handle it independently and would ask for advice if she needed it. The cruelest part was how they had both continued to play their roles perfectly when we were all together. David still brought me flowers every Friday and made our favorite pancakes on Sunday mornings. Natalie still remembered every detail about my challenging patients and celebrated my small victories at work with genuine enthusiasm.
They had compartmentalized their deception so completely that they could maintain their secret business partnership while continuing to be loving husband and devoted best friend in my presence. Every conversation about our financial goals, every discussion about saving for our future home, every moment I thought we were building something together as a team had been happening while they were secretly redirecting our progress toward investments I knew nothing about. As I sat in our kitchen that evening, looking at the stack of mail that included bank statements I had stopped reviewing carefully because I trusted David to handle the complex investment side, I realized how thoroughly I had been excluded from my own financial life. But I was no longer the same woman who had walked into that house a few hours ago, thinking her biggest concern was whether to pick up extra shifts next month to boost our house hunting fund. That woman had trusted without question. This woman was about to start questioning everything. The next morning, after David left for what he claimed was an early client consultation, I called in sick to Riverside Community Hospital for the first time in over a year. Dr. Torres sounded genuinely concerned when I told her I had a stomach bug, offering to cover my patient load and handle the medication reconciliation I was supposed to complete for the cardiac unit's new admission protocols. Her sincere care made my throat tighten with emotion. It was such a stark contrast to the calculated deception I was living with at home. I spent that entire Thursday doing something I had never imagined I would need to do, investigating my own financial life like a detective examining evidence of a crime. I started with our joint bank accounts, something I had always trusted David to monitor since he was the financial professional. What I discovered made my hands shake with a combination of rage and disbelief. Over the past 6 months, there had been regular transfers of $2,500 every 2 weeks, always on Wednesdays, moving money from our primary savings account to accounts I didn't recognize. The pattern was methodical and deliberate. Each transfer was labeled as investment reallocation in David's neat handwriting on the transaction records. But when I tried to trace where this money was going, I hit dead ends. Account numbers that didn't match any of our investment portfolios, financial institutions I had never heard of, transfers that seemed to vanish into investment vehicles that didn't appear on any of our official statements. But the most devastating discovery was a business checking account I didn't know existed. An account titled Cameron Pierce Investment Partners with both David's and Natalie's names as authorized signers. My husband and my best friend had formed an official business partnership using our marital assets, and they had been operating it for 4 months without my knowledge. The account statements told a story that made me physically nauseous. Deposits from our joint savings that I had been contributing to with every overtime shift at the hospital, withdrawals for property down payments, contractor fees, and monthly mortgage payments on investments I had never heard of. They weren't just moving our money around, they were actively using it to build a real estate portfolio that apparently had nothing to do with me. I printed everything. Bank statements, transfer records, account opening documents that showed when Cameron Pierce Investment Partners had been established. Every piece of evidence went into a folder that I stored in my car, knowing I couldn't risk David finding it in our house. The investment portfolio investigation was equally revealing and infinitely more complex than I had realized. David's laptop, which he usually kept password protected, was sitting open on his desk, probably because he thought I was too sick to venture into his office. His email account was logged in, and what I found there completely shattered any remaining hope that this might be some kind of misunderstanding. Months of correspondence between David and Natalie, starting with seemingly innocent questions about real estate markets and gradually evolving into detailed business plans. I watched their partnership develop through their written communications, saw the exact moment when they decided to use our savings as startup capital for their investment venture. But what hurt more than their financial scheming were the personal comments scattered throughout their business discussions. References to how I was too conservative with money to understand aggressive investment strategies. Jokes about how I preferred safe, boring savings accounts while they were building real wealth. Comments about how my nursing schedule kept me too busy to interfere with sophisticated financial planning. They had been mocking my financial approach while secretly using my contributions to fund investments they considered too complicated for me to understand or participate in. Every dollar I had earned through back-to-back shifts in the cardiac unit, every bonus I had saved instead of spending on myself, every sacrifice I had made to build our future together, was being redirected into a business venture that excluded me entirely. The most damaging discovery was a detailed spreadsheet titled ROI Projections and Partner Distribution that outlined their long-term financial strategy. They had been planning this partnership for 8 months, carefully calculating how to maximize returns while minimizing my awareness of what they were doing.
The spreadsheet included projected profits, property appreciation estimates, and a timeline for disclosure that suggested they planned to tell me about their investments only after they had generated enough profit to prove the value of professional financial management.
They were planning to present their deception as a gift, as if excluding me from major financial decisions was somehow beneficial to my future security. Over the following days, while maintaining the pretense of normal life, I quietly began building my own understanding of exactly what they had been doing with our money. I requested copies of all account statements for the past year, claiming I needed them for tax preparation purposes. I visited the bank where we kept our primary accounts and asked detailed questions about transfer procedures and account access, presenting myself as a wife who wanted to understand our finances better. What I learned was sobering. David had used his power of attorney on our joint accounts to establish the business partnership with Natalie without requiring my signature. Legally, because we were married and the accounts were jointly held, he had the authority to move money between investment vehicles as long as he wasn't removing it entirely from accounts with both our names on them. But ethically and personally, what he was doing constituted a massive betrayal of the partnership we had built together. Every financial decision we had made as a couple, every goal we had set, every sacrifice we had agreed to make toward our shared future had been redirected into a business venture that excluded me from decision-making while using my financial contributions as capital. I also discovered that Natalie had quit her position in the emergency department 6 weeks earlier, something she had never mentioned during our coffee dates or casual conversations at the hospital. According to HR records that I was able to access through our shared employee portal, she had given notice citing new business opportunities as her reason for leaving healthcare. She had been using the income from their real estate investments to replace her nursing salary, essentially funding her career change with money I had contributed to our joint savings accounts. While I continued working 12-hour shifts in the cardiac unit, thinking I was building our future together, she had been using our money to pursue a completely different life path. The property records were the most revealing piece of the puzzle. Through online real estate databases, I was able to identify 3 properties purchased in the past 4 months under the Cameron Pierce Investment Partners business name. A duplex in the Riverside district that was generating $2,800 monthly in rental income, a single-family home in the emerging Pine Hills neighborhood that they were renovating for resale, and a commercial property downtown that they were leasing to a new restaurant. The total value of these investments was over $400,000, which represented nearly everything David and I had saved during our 4 years of marriage. Our emergency fund, our house down payment savings, our retirement contributions, all of it had been redirected into real estate investments that were generating substantial returns for a business partnership I knew nothing about. But understanding the scope of their deception was only the beginning. I needed to determine my legal rights and options before confronting them. I scheduled a consultation with Jennifer Walsh, a family law attorney who specialized in financial disputes between spouses. When I showed her the evidence I had gathered, her expression grew increasingly serious. Your husband has technically stayed within legal boundaries since these are joint accounts, but the pattern of behavior suggests financial deception that could be relevant in divorce proceedings. The formation of a business partnership using marital assets without spousal notification, while not illegal, demonstrates a clear violation of marital financial partnership. I also reached out to a financial advisor who specialized in investment portfolio analysis. Thomas Chen at Meridian Financial Planning reviewed the property investments David and Natalie had made and confirmed that their strategy was actually quite sound from a purely financial perspective. The properties they had chosen were appreciating according to market projections, and the rental income was substantial. From an investment standpoint, Thomas explained, they've made smart choices. The problem isn't their financial acumen, it's the ethical violation of making these decisions without your participation or consent.
Meanwhile, I continued playing the role of the trusting wife who was too busy with hospital shifts to pay attention to complex financial planning. I smiled when David mentioned working late on challenging client portfolios. I nodded when he suggested we should consider more aggressive investment strategies for our savings. I maintained our normal routine of budget discussions every first Sunday of the month, even though I now knew our budget conversations were essentially theater. The hardest part wasn't the deception itself, it was the isolation. I couldn't tell my parents, who would be devastated and wouldn't understand the complexity of the financial manipulation. I couldn't confide in my colleagues at the hospital, who saw David and me as a stable, financially responsible couple. I couldn't reach out to our mutual friends, who would inevitably choose sides or accidentally reveal that I knew about the business partnership. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely alone with knowledge that was fundamentally changing how I understood my closest relationships. Some nights, lying in bed next to David while he slept peacefully, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder if I was overreacting. Was this really as serious as it felt, or was I being too sensitive about financial decisions that were ultimately benefiting our future?
But during those long, sleepless nights, something else was growing inside me. Something stronger than hurt, more focused than anger. It was a cold, systematic determination to ensure that when this situation finally came to light, I would be prepared for whatever consequences followed. If you're finding this story helpful or relatable, a quick subscribe really helps our channel grow and means the world to us. Now, let's continue with what happened next. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a comprehensive understanding of their business operations, their financial strategies, and their legal vulnerabilities. David and Natalie thought they were so clever, so much more sophisticated about investments than the conservative nurse who preferred simple savings accounts. They had no idea that the woman they were deceiving had stopped being that person the moment she discovered their secret partnership. The new version of me was patient, thorough, and absolutely determined to understand every detail of what they had been doing with our shared financial future. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks into my investigation, David and Natalie began making mistakes that revealed just how confident they had become in their deception. It was as if my continued obliviousness had made them careless, and they started taking risks that bordered on insulting to my intelligence. The first major slip came during our monthly budget meeting, a tradition I had insisted we maintain despite knowing it was now essentially meaningless. We sat at our kitchen table on the first Sunday of December with our laptops open and coffee cups steaming between us, pretending to review our financial progress toward homeownership. David pulled up our savings account statements and casually mentioned that our emergency fund had grown by 12% over the past quarter. "The new investment allocation strategy is really paying off," he said, pointing to numbers on his screen that I knew were completely fabricated. "We should be able to accelerate our timeline for house hunting by 6 months at this rate." I smiled and nodded enthusiastically, even though I knew our actual emergency fund had been depleted by 60% to fund their property investments. "That's amazing, honey. What specific investments have been performing so well?" David's hesitation was barely perceptible, but I caught it. "Oh, the usual diversified portfolio stuff, market index funds, some bond allocations, nothing too exciting, but steady growth." He was lying to me directly to my face while showing me falsified account summaries that bore no resemblance to our actual financial situation. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also gave me valuable information about how sophisticated their deception had become. They weren't just moving money around anymore. They were actively creating fake financial reports to maintain the illusion of our original savings goals. The second escalation came later that week during what should have been a routine coffee date with Natalie at Sunrise Cafe. She arrived wearing a designer coat I had never seen before, clearly expensive, and driving a nearly new Honda CR-V that definitely hadn't been in her budget 6 months ago when she was complaining about her old car's transmission problems. "Wow, Natalie, you look amazing," I said as she sat down across from me in our usual corner booth.
That coat is gorgeous. And is that a new car I saw you get out of? She flushed slightly and looked uncomfortable. Oh, yeah. I've been doing some freelance consulting work on the side, healthcare administration stuff for small clinics. It's been pretty lucrative. Healthcare administration consulting. I almost laughed out loud. Natalie had always joked that paperwork was her least favorite part of nursing, and she had never shown any interest in administrative work during our entire friendship. But here she was, using income from their real estate investments to fund a lifestyle upgrade while telling me she was earning money through fictional consulting work. That's fantastic, I said warmly. I had no idea you were interested in the business side of healthcare. What kind of consulting are you doing exactly? Her answer was vague and full of buzzwords that made it clear she was improvising. Just helping small practices optimize their patient flow systems and revenue cycle management. You know, efficiency stuff. What she didn't know was that I had already confirmed through the state licensing board that no healthcare consulting business was registered under her name, and her former colleagues in the emergency department had mentioned that she had left nursing entirely to pursue other opportunities without providing any specifics. The most revealing incident came the following weekend during a dinner party at our neighbors, the Hendersons' house on Oak Street. It was supposed to be a casual gathering of couples from our neighborhood, the kind of evening David and I had always enjoyed. But this time, I want prepared to test just how far their deception extended. During the cocktail hour, I made sure to engage other guests in conversations about financial planning and investment strategies. I mentioned how impressed I was with David's recent success in growing our savings and how grateful I felt to have such a financially savvy husband managing our future security. David's been making some really smart investment choices lately. He's been working with some new investment partners, and the returns have been incredible. We might be able to buy a house 6 months earlier than we planned. When Jim asked about the specifics of these successful investments, I made sure to speak loud enough for David to overhear. I don't understand all the technical details, but he's been working closely with someone who really knows the real estate market. They've been buying properties together and generating amazing rental income.
I watched David's face go pale as he realized I was describing their business partnership to our neighbors, though I was presenting it as if I was fully aware and supportive of their activities. The panic in his eyes was immediate and unmistakable. Later, during dinner, I continued my strategic commentary. Natalie's been such a great resource, too, I said to the table at large. She left nursing to focus on real estate investments, and she's been helping David understand market trends in ways that have really benefited our financial planning. Natalie nearly choked on her wine. Rachel, I think you might be misunderstanding what kind of help I've been providing, she said carefully. Oh, I don't think I'm misunderstanding anything, I replied with a bright smile. I may not be involved in the day-to-day details, but I definitely understand the big picture of what you two have been working on together. The rest of the dinner party was uncomfortable for everyone, except me. David and Natalie kept exchanging worried glances, clearly trying to figure out exactly how much I knew and whether my comments were innocent or calculated. Our neighbors seemed confused by the tension they could sense but couldn't identify. After we left the Hendersons' house, David was quiet during the drive home. Finally, as we pulled into our driveway, he spoke up. Rachel, I think there might be some confusion about the investment advice Natalie has been giving me. It's not as formal or extensive as you made it sound tonight. Isn't it? I asked innocently. I thought you two had been working together on some property investments. Wasn't that what all those lunch meetings were about? David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What lunch meetings? The business meetings at Riverside Grill? I assumed you were discussing real estate opportunities since you've been so successful with property investments lately. Isn't that where you've been generating those amazing returns in our portfolio? The silence that followed was deafening. David was trying to process whether I actually knew about their business partnership or whether I was making educated guesses based on fragments of information I had picked up inadvertently. We should probably talk about this more specifically, he said finally. I think there might be some miscommunication about what kind of investment activities I've been involved in.
Of course, I agreed cheerfully. I'd love to understand the details better. Why don't you show me the specific accounts where these successful investments are held? I've been so focused on our traditional savings that I haven't been paying attention to the more sophisticated portfolio management you've been doing. David's face went completely white. He couldn't show me investment accounts that were held under a business partnership I wasn't supposed to know about, but he also couldn't explain the impressive returns he had been claiming without revealing the source of those profits. Let me organize the paperwork first. Some of the investment structures are complex, and I want to make sure I can explain everything clearly. Over the following days, I could sense their growing panic. David started working even later at the office, probably trying to figure out how to handle my apparent knowledge of their business activities. Natalie began canceling our regular coffee dates, claiming she was dealing with some complicated personal matters that required her full attention. Their text messages, which I had learned to monitor through David's laptop when he left it open, revealed their increasing desperation. "How much does she actually know?" Natalie had written. "Should we just tell her everything and hope she's okay with it?" David had responded, "I can't tell if she figured it out or if she's just making lucky guesses, but we need to be more careful. She's asking specific questions that suggest she knows more than she's letting on." The psychological pressure was working exactly as I had hoped. They were no longer operating from a position of confident secrecy. They were scared, uncertain, and starting to make the kind of mistakes that would give me even more evidence when the time came for the final confrontation. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't guessing about anything. I knew exactly what they had been doing, down to the specific properties they owned, the monthly rental income they were generating, and the sophisticated financial strategies they had used to exclude me from decisions about my own money. The difference was that while they were panicking about damage control, I was systematically building a comprehensive case that would demonstrate not just their financial deception, but their ongoing willingness to lie directly to my face even when confronted with evidence of their activities. They thought they were dealing with suspicions that they could still manage through careful explanations and strategic honesty. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who had already documented every aspect of their business partnership and was now testing the limits of their willingness to continue deceiving me even when they suspected I knew the truth. The final confrontation was approaching, but it would happen on my terms when I was fully prepared for whatever consequences followed. They had spent months building their secret partnership while underestimating my intelligence and determination. They were about to learn just how expensive that mistake had been. The final confrontation came sooner than I had planned, but in a way that was more perfect than anything I could have orchestrated myself. It was a Friday evening in mid-December, exactly 2 months after I had discovered their business partnership at Riverside Grill. The winter air was crisp and clear, and our neighborhood was decorated with holiday lights that cast a warm glow over the snow-covered streets of Maplewood Creek.
I had been working a double shift at Riverside Community Hospital, covering for a colleague who had called in sick with the flu that was making its way through the cardiac unit. I was exhausted, but satisfied after successfully managing a complex patient who had come in with chest pain that turned out to be a minor heart attack requiring immediate intervention. As I drove home through the familiar streets, I was thinking about the overtime pay from the double shift and how, just 2 months ago, I would have been excited to add those extra earnings to our house hunting fund. Now, I knew that any additional income would likely be redirected into real estate investments I had no voice in choosing. I was so absorbed in these thoughts that I almost missed the text message that would change everything. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat as I waited at a red light 3 blocks from our house. I glanced at it casually, expecting to see a message from David about dinner plans or a reminder from the hospital about next week's schedule. Instead, I saw a text from Natalie that made my heart stop completely. Emergency meeting tonight at 8 p.m. David thinks Rachel is getting suspicious about the Pinecrest property financing. We need to decide if we should tell her everything or find a way to redirect her attention. Can't keep pretending much longer. the message wasn't meant for me. In her panic and stress, Natalie had accidentally sent the text to me instead of David. For a moment, I stared at the screen in disbelief, reading the words over and over again. Then a cold, calculating calm settled over me. This was it. This was the moment I had been preparing for, arriving ahead of schedule but perfectly timed nonetheless. They had decided to have a crisis meeting about how to handle my suspicions, completely unaware that I had been documenting their business activities for weeks. I quickly forwarded Natalie's text to David with a simple message, "Wrong number, see you both at home in 30 minutes. Then I drove home with the windows down, letting the December air clear my head as I prepared for the performance of my lifetime. When I pulled into our driveway, both David's sedan and Natalie's Honda were already there. Through our front windows, I could see them in our living room, sitting on the sectional sofa we had purchased together last spring, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. David was leaning forward with his head in his hands, while Natalie was gesturing emphatically with papers spread across our coffee table. They looked like business partners trying to solve a crisis management problem, which is exactly what they were. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at our house one last time as the home I had thought it was. The craftsman structure looked the same, with the wreaths I had hung on the front porch last weekend and the warm light spilling from our living room windows. But everything was different now. This wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was the stage for the final act of a partnership that had been over for months without my knowledge. I walked up the front steps and opened the door with my usual greeting. "I'm home. Sorry I'm so late. The double shift ran longer than expected." The conversation in the living room stopped abruptly. I could hear the rustling of papers being quickly gathered and the hushed whispers of people trying to arrange themselves to look innocent. When I rounded the corner into our living room, David and Natalie were sitting at opposite ends of the sofa, a careful distance between them that probably looked casual to someone who didn't know what I knew. "Oh, Natalie," I said, with genuine-sounding surprise. "I didn't know you were coming over. This is unexpected." She looked absolutely miserable, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a folder of documents. David was trying to maintain his usual composed demeanor, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was clenched. "Rachel," Natalie began, her voice shaky, "we need to talk to you about something important." "Of course," I said, settling into the armchair across from them with the same casual ease I had shown 1,000 times before. "What's going on? You both look really serious." They exchanged a glance, and I saw David give Natalie a small nod of encouragement. She took a deep breath, and I could see her gathering courage for what she thought would be the most difficult conversation of her life. "Rachel, there's something we need to tell you about some business activities David and I have been involved in, and it's going to be very difficult to hear." "Okay," I said gently, leaning forward with concern. "You're starting to worry me. What kind of business activities?" "We've been investing in real estate together," David said, finally finding his voice. His tone was careful, like he was testing how much information he could reveal safely. "A partnership," I repeated, quietly, letting confusion and then dawning comprehension cross my face. "What kind of partnership?" "We formed a business together," Natalie admitted, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "Cameron Pierce Investment Partners. We've been buying properties and generating rental income." I let the silence stretch for a long moment, watching them both squirm under my gaze. "How long has this been going on?" 6 months, David said. "Since July." 6 months, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. 6 months of business meetings. 6 months of investment decisions. 6 months of... what exactly? "We've been using some of our joint savings as startup capital," David continued, clearly trying to present their activities in the most favorable light possible. "But the returns have been excellent. We've actually grown the overall value of our assets significantly." Our joint savings, I said, my voice growing stronger. You've been using our money I contributed through overtime shifts and weekend work to fund a business partnership I knew nothing about. They both nodded miserably. And you formed this partnership without telling me, made investment decisions without consulting me, and have been generating income from properties I was never informed about. Rachel, please, Natalie started, but I held up my hand to stop her. No, I said, my voice growing stronger. Let me understand this completely. You two have been meeting secretly for 6 months, using my financial contributions to build a real estate portfolio and planning your business future together while I worked extra shifts thinking I was saving for our house down payment. It's not as bad as it sounds, David said desperately. We always intended to include you in the profits. We were building something that would benefit all of us. I stood up slowly, and both of them tensed as if they expected me to scream or break down crying. Instead, I walked to the mantelpiece where our wedding photos were displayed and picked up the largest one, a picture of David and me cutting our cake at the reception. You know what the interesting thing is? I said conversationally, still holding the photo. I already knew about all of this. The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear their hearts stop beating. What? David whispered. I turned around to face them, and I saw my own reflection in the mirror above the mantelpiece. I looked calm, controlled, and completely in command of the situation. It was a far cry from the shocked, betrayed wife they had expected to devastate with their confession. I said, I already knew, I repeated clearly. I've known for 2 months. I saw you at Riverside Grill on November 15th, signing documents and discussing property investments. I watched you conduct business meetings using money from our joint accounts. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth, and David's face went completely white. I've documented everything, I continued matter-of-factly. The Cameron Pierce Investment Partners business account, the 3 properties you've purchased with our savings, the $2,500 biweekly transfers from our emergency fund, the rental income you've been generating, all of it. Rachel, we can explain, David started, but I cut him off. No, I said. Can you explain why you've been presenting me with falsified bank statements during our monthly budget meetings? Can you explain why you've been claiming our emergency fund was growing when you've actually depleted it by 60%? Can you explain why you thought it was acceptable to form a business partnership using marital assets without informing your spouse? I set the wedding photo face down on the mantelpiece with a decisive click. The difference between us, I said, looking directly at both of them, is that while you were planning how to manage my reaction to your deception, I was planning how to protect myself from people I could no longer trust. David found his voice first. What do you mean? I smiled for the first time since I had walked into the room, and it wasn't a nice smile. I mean that for the past 2 months, while you two have been congratulating yourselves on your business acumen and wondering how to handle my suspicions, I've been consulting with attorneys, financial advisors, and documenting every aspect of your business activities. The color drained from both their faces as the full implications of what I was saying began to sink in. You wanted to exclude me from financial decisions about my own money. You wanted to treat me like someone too simple to understand sophisticated investments. You wanted to manage me like a problem to be solved, rather than a partner who deserved honesty and respect. I walked toward the front door, then paused and turned back to look at them one last time. But here's what you never understood. I wasn't too simple to figure out what you were doing. I was too smart to confront you before I was completely prepared for the consequences. And now that I am prepared, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation about the future of Cameron Pierce Investment Partners and my role in recovering my financial assets. I opened the front door
and stepped out into the crisp December air. You have until Monday morning to decide whether you want to work with me on an equitable resolution or whether you'd prefer to explain your business practices to a family court judge. Either way, the days of making decisions about my money without my participation are over. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their perfect plan, finally understanding that the naive wife they had been deceiving was gone forever, replaced by someone who had been 3 steps ahead of them for months.
I drove straight to the Hampton Inn downtown, my hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The December evening was clear and cold, and the city lights of Willowbrook sparkled like ice crystals as I made my way through the familiar streets that would soon be part of my past. I had booked a suite there 3 days earlier, anticipating that this moment would come soon, though I hadn't expected it to arrive via Natalie's panicked, misdirected text message. The hotel suite was on the 8th floor with a view of the downtown business district where David's accounting firm was located. I had chosen it specifically because it felt the opposite of our colonial home on Cedar Avenue. Modern, clean, and completely under my control. As I settled into the comfortable chair by the window with a cup of coffee from the lobby, my phone began to buzz incessantly. David called first, exactly 12 minutes after I had walked out of the house. I let it go to voicemail. Then again 3 minutes later. Then again. Between his calls, text messages started flooding in from both him and Natalie, each more desperate than the last. David, please come home so we can discuss this properly. We need to work through this together. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain. You have every right to be angry, but we can fix this. This isn't how we wanted you to find out. We need to talk about moving forward constructively. I never meant for any of this to happen. You're my best friend, and I love you. Please don't shut me out. Where are you staying? I'm worried about you being alone when you're this upset. The messages kept coming, growing more frantic as the evening wore on. I read each one carefully, analyzing the desperation behind their words. They were panicking, realizing that their carefully constructed business partnership had not only been discovered, but had been turned completely against them. By 10 p.m., the messages had evolved from apologies to bargaining. Natalie, can we meet tomorrow? I'll answer any questions you have about the business. I owe you complete transparency. David, I know you're hurt, but we can work through this. We can restructure everything to include you as an equal partner. By midnight, they had moved to outright pleading. David, please just respond so I know you're safe. I can't live with myself knowing I've hurt you like this. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Natalie, I can't sleep knowing I've destroyed our friendship. Please give me a chance to explain my side. There's so much you don't understand about why this happened. I turned my phone to silent and went to sleep in the king-size bed, sleeping better than I had in months. For the first time since discovering their business partnership, I wasn't lying next to someone who was betraying me, wasn't pretending to be something I wasn't carrying the burden of their deceptions. The next morning brought a new wave of consequences I hadn't anticipated. My phone showed 47 missed calls and 73 text messages. But it wasn't just from David and Natalie anymore. Apparently, in their panic and desperation, they had started reaching out to our mutual friends and even my family, trying to find me. Dr. Torres had called 6 times from the hospital. Jim Henderson had left worried voicemails. Even my sister in Portland had called, concerned because David had contacted her claiming I had disappeared after a serious misunderstanding about some financial decisions. The most telling messages came from people who had clearly been given very different versions of the story. Dr. Torres's text read, "Honey, David said you had an argument about investment strategies and you're not answering your phone. He seems really worried. Please call me." But Jim Henderson's message was more revealing. "Rachel, I don't know what's going on with the business situation you mentioned at dinner last week, but both David and Natalie seem pretty desperate to find you. Are you okay?" They were already spinning the narrative, but they couldn't keep their story straight. To some people, I was a wife who overreacted to financial disagreements. To others, I was somehow involved in a complicated business situation. The inconsistency would work in my favor. By noon on Saturday, Jennifer Walsh, my family law attorney, called with news that made my smile for the second time in 24 hours.
Your husband's attorney contacted my office this morning, she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a lawyer who had anticipated exactly this development. Apparently, he wants to discuss an amicable resolution to what he's calling business partnership complications. They're requesting a meeting for Monday morning. Already? I asked, genuinely surprised. That was fast. Panic makes people move quickly. And from what his lawyer said, your husband is very motivated to resolve this quietly and efficiently, which tells me he understands exactly how much legal trouble he could be in. The weekend brought even more interesting developments. Thomas Chen, my financial advisor, called Saturday afternoon with an update that confirmed my suspicions about their growing desperation. I did some additional research on the Cameron Pierce investment properties. They've been making minimum payments on all 3 mortgages, which suggests they're cash flow tight despite the rental income. If they lose access to the joint account transfers, they'll have serious liquidity problems within 60 days.
This information was crucial. Their business model was completely dependent on continued access to our marital savings accounts. Without those regular $2,500 transfers, they wouldn't be able to maintain their mortgage payments or fund new investments. I had more leverage than I had initially realized. Sunday brought the most satisfying consequence of all. My phone rang at 9 a.m., and for the first time since Friday night, I answered. Hello? Natalie. Rachel. Her voice was hoarse, like she had been crying for days. Thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would. I figured it was time we had a real conversation. I know you hate me, she said, and I could hear her struggling not to cry. I know I've lost you forever, and I deserve that, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. This business partnership, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. But it did happen, I said calmly, for 6 months. It happened every day when you made investment decisions using money I earned through overnight shifts at the hospital. It happened every time you met with David to plan your business future while I thought we were all building our futures together. The conversation continued for 25 minutes, with Natalie confessing details I already knew and some I didn't. She told me about the guilt that had eaten at her every day, about the times she had almost told me the truth, about how she had tried to convince David to include me as an equal partner from the beginning, but he had insisted I was too risk-averse for real estate investing. Where are you staying? I asked. At David's house, she admitted, and the words clearly pained her. I know how wrong that feels. I know I don't belong there, but I didn't have anywhere else to go after you left, and we needed to figure out how to handle the business obligations. And what has David decided about handling those business obligations? He said, she paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to reveal. He said you'd probably file for divorce and want to liquidate everything, so we needed to prepare for the possibility of selling the properties quickly. David was already planning for the end of our marriage, making business decisions about liquidating assets I helped fund without bothering to consult me about what I actually wanted to do. The assumption that I would simply disappear from their business equation was as insulting as the original deception. Natalie, I said, my voice gentle but firm, I want you to understand something. This conversation doesn't change the fundamental situation. Our friendship is over. What you and David did to me, the systematic exclusion from financial decisions about my money, that's not something I can forgive or forget. I know, she whispered. I know. But I also want you to know that I'm not the same person you thought you were deceiving. I'm not naive about business or finance, and I'm not going to disappear quietly so you two can reorganize your partnership around my absence. There was a long pause. What do you mean? I mean that while you've been crying and feeling guilty, I've been planning, and your guilt isn't going to protect you from the legal and financial consequences of forming a business partnership using marital assets without spousal consent. I ended the call and immediately saved the recording to my secure file.
In our state, recording phone conversations was legal as long as one party consented, and I had been very careful to protect myself legally throughout this entire process. By Sunday evening, the initial wave of panic from David and Natalie had given way to a different kind of desperation. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be the controlled, amicable resolution they had hoped for. They were realizing that the woman they had betrayed had not only discovered their business activities, but had used that information to prepare for a battle they didn't even know was coming. The phone calls and text messages had stopped. The frantic reaching out to mutual friends had ceased. In the silence, I could practically hear them consulting attorneys, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage from their own choices. But it was too late for damage control. The consequences were already in motion, and I was the one controlling the pace and direction of everything that came next. They had wanted to exclude me from my own financial story, to cast me as the naive wife who would step aside gracefully when presented with their business expertise. Instead, they had created a formidable opponent who held detailed documentation of their activities and was finally ready to use that information to protect her interests. 8 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new downtown loft apartment, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink over the Willowbrook Business District. The view was spectacular, a panoramic sweep of the city that had once felt like a place where I was building someone else's dreams, but now felt like a landscape I had conquered and claimed as my own.
The transformation in my life had been as dramatic as the transformation in myself. The legal resolution had ended exactly as Jennifer Walsh predicted. David and Natalie had accepted our terms within 48 hours of our Monday morning meeting, unable to face the prospect of a protracted legal battle that would have exposed every detail of their business practices to public scrutiny. The financial settlement was more than fair. It was justice served with compound interest. David had been forced to buy out my stake in Cameron Pierce Investment Partners at full market value, plus reimburse me for every dollar of marital assets they had used without my consent. The restitution alone had been substantial. 6 months of unauthorized transfers, property down payments, and business expenses funded with my contributions added up to more than I had earned in overtime paid during my entire nursing career. Combined with my rightful share of the property appreciation and rental income they had generated, I had walked away from our marriage significantly wealthier than when I entered it. But the money, satisfying as it was, had never been the real victory. The real victory was standing here in my own space, surrounded by the life I had built entirely on my own terms. The loft was everything our colonial rental had never been: sleek, modern, and uncompromisingly mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, and every piece of furniture had been chosen because I loved it, not because it fits someone else's vision of what our life should look like. I had left my position at Riverside Community Hospital 5 months ago to launch my own healthcare consulting business, focusing on financial management for medical practices. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of working in patient care while someone else managed my finances, I had finally learned to apply my analytical skills to the business side of healthcare. My client list was growing rapidly, fueled by word-of-mouth referrals and a waiting list that stretched for months. Turns out my experience with complex financial deception had given me unique insights into protecting small businesses from internal financial mismanagement. I could spot the warning signs of financial irregularities that other consultants missed entirely. The doorbell chimed again, interrupting my morning reflection. I smiled, knowing exactly who it would be. Monday mornings had become my new sacred time, but instead of budget meetings with someone who was deceiving me, it was now coffee and strategy sessions with people who had proven themselves worthy of my trust. I opened the door to find Dr. Amanda Torres, my former colleague and current business partner, holding a folder thick with new client contracts and wearing the kind of smile that suggested excellent news. "We did it," she announced before I could even greet her properly. "Riverside Medical Group signed this morning. That's the largest practice management contract we've landed yet."
I felt a surge of satisfaction that had everything to do with building something genuine from the ground up. Taurus Medical Consulting had grown from an idea we discussed during break room conversations into a thriving business that was making a real difference for healthcare providers struggling with financial management. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let Amanda enter. "I'll make coffee." As I prepared our usual Monday morning coffee, Amanda settled into one of the leather chairs by the window, looking out at the view that never failed to impress visitors. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've been watching you rebuild your life these past 8 months, and I have to say, you're not the same person who used to work at Cardiac Care with me." "Good different or concerning different?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from her tone. "Powerful different, confident different." The Rachel who worked at the hospital was competent, but always deferring to other people's expertise, always assuming other people knew better about financial decisions. This version of you knows exactly what she's worth and isn't afraid to demand it. She was right. The woman I had become post-betrayal was someone I barely recognized sometimes. I negotiated contracts with an assertiveness that surprised even me. I set boundaries without guilt or apology. I had learned the difference between being collaborative and being taken advantage of, between trusting people and being naive about their motivations. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was Thomas Chen, my financial advisor, who had become both a professional partner and friend. He brought bagels from Morrison's Bakery, the same shop where David and I used to pick up Sunday morning treats, though the memory no longer carried any emotional weight. "Any updates on the former business partners?" Thomas asked with a kind of casual interest that had replaced my initial obsession with monitoring their consequences. I had stopped actively tracking David and Natalie months ago, but information still filtered back to me through the professional networks that connected everyone in Willowbrook's business community. The details were as predictable as I had expected them to be. Cameron Pierce Investment Partners dissolved in April. Apparently, they couldn't maintain the mortgage payments on all 3 properties without access to the regular capital infusions they had been getting from her joint accounts. And the former partners themselves?
David's still at Brennan Financial Services, but word is that his client base has shrunk significantly. Turns out when your reputation for ethical financial management takes a hit, people start looking for advisors they can trust more completely. Natalie tried to restart her nursing career, but the healthcare community here is small. Most practice managers have heard some version of why she left emergency medicine originally. We all nodded, understanding the way professional reputations worked in close-knit communities. Their business failures weren't the result of my vindictiveness. They were the natural consequences of making financial decisions that violated professional ethics and personal trust. I heard from Jim Henderson that David's been telling people you refuse to be reasonable about restructuring the business partnership, Amanda said. Like he's the victim in all this. Let him, I replied with a shrug. Anyone who knows the real story understands exactly why I chose legal resolution over continued business entanglement. And anyone who doesn't know the real story isn't somebody whose opinion affects my life. That was perhaps the biggest change in me, the complete disregard for managing other people's perceptions of my choices. The old Rachel would have been devastated at the thought that some people might see her as unforgiving or money-focused. The new Rachel understood that people who judged victims for protecting themselves were revealing more about their own character than about hers. As the morning wound down and Amanda prepared to leave for her afternoon client meetings, she paused at the door with the kind of expression that suggested she had something important to say. "You know, when this whole situation first started, I thought it would destroy you. Finding out that the 2 people you trusted most had been systematically excluding you from decisions about your own money, that seemed like the kind of betrayal that breaks people permanently." But it didn't break me. No, it didn't. You lost a deceptive husband and a fake friend, but you gained something much more valuable. You discovered who you really are when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets stripped away. And it turns out you're someone who's much stronger and smarter than anyone, including yourself, ever realized. After she left, I stood alone on my balcony again, this time under a clear December sky that seemed brighter and more expansive than any I had seen from the windows of our colonial rental on Cedar Avenue. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my pulse quickened, wondering if it might be David or Natalie attempting some new form of contact. But it was from a potential client I had been courting,
the owner of a small surgical practice who was ready to sign with Torres Medical Consulting. The business was thriving, my personal life was entirely my own, and I was building something that couldn't be destroyed by other people's choices because it was built on my own skills, judgment, and determination. Standing there under the December sun, I thought about the woman who had sat in her car outside Riverside Grill 8 months ago, watching her financial security disappear through a restaurant window. She felt so small, so powerless, so completely at the mercy of other people's decisions about her money and her future. That woman was gone, but not in the way David and Natalie had planned. She hadn't been destroyed by their betrayal. She had been refined by it, forged into someone harder, smarter, and absolutely unbreakable. They had wanted to exclude me from their story, to cast me aside so they could build their business empire without the inconvenience of dealing with the person whose money was funding their dreams. Instead, they gave me the greatest gift imaginable, the opportunity to discover who I really was when everything I thought I knew about trust and partnership was stripped away. And it turns out I was someone who is much stronger and smarter than anyone, including myself, ever realized. Looking out over the city lights of Willowbrook, I smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had not just survived her worst nightmare, but had transformed it into her greatest triumph. I was no longer the woman who had been too trusting, too accommodating, too willing to let other people make important decisions about her financial future. I was the woman who had taken control of her own story and written herself the ending she deserved. The woman who had learned that sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most powerful transformations. If this story resonated with you, I hope it reminds you that you're stronger than you think, and that sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us the most valuable lessons about our own strength and resilience. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.